Me or not, and I don't know if I'm afraid or excited to speak to so many, may I say, beautiful women, and I'm not used to it, because usually when I lecture and when I make a speaking opportunity, it's usually for mostly men that are interested in work, security, things like this. And as a matter of fact, this is the first time I'm speaking in front of a only women group. So I'm embarrassed. And I'm also embarrassed because Israelis, if you know, don't know how to receive a compliment. For an Israeli, a compliment is a trait, which means, do I owe him something? Do I have to do that? So thank you for your compliments, President, but believe me, I'm still shaken. Now let's talk about Ukraine. By the way, I understand that this building belongs to the Sham community, and if there are among you people that were in Syria and were in Damascus, or remember Aleppo or Halab, as you say, I was there. I think I was in this room at least the last to be there in 2007 after Israel bombarded and destroyed the nuclear reactor that Bashar Assad built with the help of the North Koreans. They sent me, the paper sent me to see what actually happened there. I went, of course, in a non-Israeli identity, with a non-Israeli passport, and I visited, in the beginning, Halab, and then I went to Damascus, and I did Yom Kippur with the Frangic community in Damascus. I don't know if some of you know what is the Frangic community. This is the only active synagogue in Damascus, and in Yom Kippur I was there. I think they knew that I'm an Israeli, but they didn't say anything. And that was an experience that I was reminded of when I came here to the Shami community. Now to Ukraine. Look, I think I'm the oldest person in the room here. Yes, by no means. I'm telling you. And most of my life I covered wars. The last war that I covered outside Israel was in 2011, when there was a mutiny, a revolution against Gaddafi in Libya, and I was sent to Libya to cover this revolution. And because of the internet and because of the new media, some people recognized me there, and I barely escaped. And after that, I said, enough is enough. And sometimes it is pathetic in my age to behave like a young chicken journalist in the area, in war zones. And I swore in 2011 that that's the end. I've written 2 books about the wars around the world in the last 57 years. Enough is enough. And here comes February 12th, it was a Saturday, and we were, my partner and me, we were in a lunch with friends, and there is a call from the editor, and he says, Oron, would you like to go to Ukraine to cover the war? And I was amazed, and that is why I'm telling you this story, that my reflex was Pavlovian. I said, yes, of course. I didn't even hesitate or didn't even think twice, which tells something about human beings that are doing something too long time. And the morning after, that was in Shabbat, noontime, and at 9 o'clock the morning after, Sunday, I was already in the airport of Kiev, the capital of Ukraine. The first thing I thought, okay, the foreign ministry gave an instruction, gave an official declaration that all the Israelis should go, all the Israelis and the Jews that came should go out of Ukraine because there is going to be a war. The foreign ministry actually got the information from the Americans and the British. The point is that nobody, only our intelligence community believed the Americans because they know that the Americans are good at intelligence gathering and there is a lot of collaboration between Israel, and Israel helps sometimes to the Americans to collect the information, so there is very close relations. And the foreign ministry said all the Israelis should go. Now, one thing that you don't know is that the biggest group of foreigners in Ukraine before the war were Israelis. And who is the biggest group? The second biggest group? Turks. So the Israelis, there were about 10,000 Israelis in Kiev. Why? In Kiev and in Ukraine, in large, in Kharkov, I'm not talking about only Jews, but Israelis, because Ukrainians are good workers of high tech. And in Israel, there are not enough high-tech programmers and people that know how to deal. And every startup, good startup in Israel, is going to Ukraine to recruit programmers for the Israeli projects, for the Israeli startup project. So when they say about Israel that it is a startup nation, okay, with the help of some friends that we do. And there were thousands of Ukrainians that were working and are still working. You know why they are still working? Because the Israeli companies, most of them, the biggest, took thousands of workers, like 3,000 workers of one company, and before the war, transferred them to, say, to Berlin, to Romania, to Poland, to relatively safer places. Most of them are young people with no families, and they continue work for them. So when I came to Kiev at the 12th of February, at the 13th of February, the war broke out 11 days later. Nobody went to travel back to Israel. All the Israelis said, Putin will not do it. The Ukrainian president said, Putin will not do it. And all the Ukrainian, I was going in the street, interview Ukrainians, old Ukrainians, young Ukrainians, even youngsters, and all of them said, what can he win by invading Ukraine? He wants to frighten Biden, and he threatened Biden, and he uses us as a pretext to extorting concessions from the American president and the West and the European Union. Nobody believed. I went to Ukraine with the little feeling that this time Putin is serious. But when I came to Kiev, I was convinced that I was wrong. They managed to convince. Zelensky even said the whole war is in a panic that Americans are making. And as a matter of fact, I remember I went to a bar in Kiev. They asked me to do a video, a documentary about how Ukrainians in Kiev are feeling about the coming war. That's from Israel. And I said, they don't feel. They said, okay, prove us. I come to the bar, people are drunk. I asked them about the war. They said, leave us alone. There will be no war and nothing like this. Before I will tell them what happened when the war broke out, I want to explain to you something about Ukraine that is important to understand. You see this map, and you see the map. This is Ukraine. This is Ukraine until here. This is Russia. This is Belarus. This is Poland. This is Slovakia. This is Czech. This is Hungary. And this is Moldova. Ukraine actually is not one whole unit. Ukraine is divided into two unequal zones, East Ukraine and West Ukraine. Why do I mention this? And the border between East and West Ukraine is the Dnieper River that goes from Belarus to the Black Sea. This is the Black Sea, this is Crimea, and this is Azov Sea. This is Ukraine beaches, this is Russia. The point is that Putin is right. East Ukraine, which means Ukraine east of the Dnieper River, was in the last 300 years was controlled by Russia, starting with Empress Yekaterina and till today. West Ukraine was controlled by an Austro-Hungarian empire and the Poles. And the Poles were imperialists through and through. So Poland controlled this part of West Ukraine, the Austro-Hungarians controlled this part of West Ukraine, but not only they have different culture, they belong to Europe, they belong to Russia, but for so many years I worked with the computer. I worked even before there was a computer. I'm the generation that when we did television documentaries or reports, we did it in film. Probably you don't know what I'm talking about. But look it up in Google what film is. And the point that I want to make is that it's not only a difference, but who was the imperial power in these areas, but in this area, they speak Russian. In this area, they speak mostly Ukrainian. And this area is Greek Orthodox by religion, like the Russian. Okay, I got this area was speaking Russian, the East Ukraine, West Ukraine speak Ukraine, and the East Ukraine, because of the Russian influence, As a matter of fact, I have to go back on my words, not because of the Russians. On the contrary, the Russian church starts in Kiev. Started in Kiev. The whole Russian church started in Kiev. And that is why Putin didn't bombard the center of Kiev. Because there are two main monasteries there, Sofitskaya and Lavra, and both these two churches are holy to the Russians more than to the Ukrainians. And one more thing, the West Ukrainians are Catholic. Most of them are Catholic. And they have made the most serious pogroms in the Jews in West Ukraine, not in East Ukraine. Khmelnytsky, Petlura, Banderas, all of them were in West Ukraine. And they have even towns on my name. So we don't have a special reason to love Ukraine as a Jews. But the Ukraine today is a different Ukraine from what we saw. And what impressed me so much is why they were objecting the Russians. They wanted to be free. It sounds like a cliche, like something you say nice in order to play nice to your audience. But yes, they were simply didn't want to go back to a neo-Soviet era. They wanted to remain Western, liberal, democratic Western, with economic opportunities and all this, and they didn't want to go back to the new Tsar of Russia, Putin. Simply like this, and if you ask yourself all the time, why they were so fierce? After all, Russia and Ukraine were together for a long time during the Soviet Union time. So why they objected so much? By the way, Putin made this most serious mistake when he invaded Ukraine. He believed, and also his intelligence told him, don't worry. When we come to Ukraine, the Ukrainian women will come out with their blonde hair and traditional dresses, offering us bread and salt as the tradition goes, and there will be no problem. That is why the Russian army that invaded afterwards the Ukraine actually was not prepared for the steep resistance that it got in Ukraine. Coming back to me, after visiting the bar and making interviews in the street, I reported back home, listen guys, you waste your time, you waste your money, there will be no war. But then my editor said, and this is the way things work in the media, but my editor said, you see, all other Israeli media have a representative, have a correspondent, have a reporter in Kiev. We want to be there present too, that they will not say that we don't report. Stay a few days. I said, okay. And on the 18th, an Israeli with connections with the Ukrainian regime, with the Ukrainian presidency, made for me an appointment with the head of the Ukrainian intelligence, military intelligence. And when we talked, the guy, I was shocked, really shocked. The guys gave me, he said, you want to know what the Russians are going to do? First of all, they are going to invade. Secondly, they are going to do this, and that. In the beginning, they will start with what the Americans call false flag, which means a campaign of lies that was supposed not to convince the world, but to convince the Russians that the special military operation is necessary. You know, the Russians are very, very sensitive to dead soldiers. The Russian mothers don't want to see their sons dead more than the Israeli mothers. And for Putin, it was very important for him not to justify to the Americans, but to justify to his own mothers. How do I know? I covered the war in Chechnya. I went to Chechnya when Putin won the war. And the only thing that he was afraid of are the mother of the Russian soldiers that got dead in Chechnya, and that is why he went out of Chechnya the moment he finished the war. He left there his own stooge, his own collaborator, but this is what he did. So the war begins actually with Russian troops around the borders of Ukraine, in Russia, and in Belarus, which is a Russian client. And it starts with a false flag, between a campaign of lies, telling that the Ukrainians are Nazis. Okay, there are some neo-Nazi group in Ukraine, but the Ukrainian Zelensky is a Nazi. The Nazis, I don't think, will accept Zelensky as a member, because he's so disorganized and his regime is so funny. You know, I used to call ministers. There was no problem in getting the telephone number of the minister. And it was only a question whether his telephone line was not busy at the time. If it was not busy, I could call the defense minister, who is Jewish, and tell him I'm Israeli journalist. Yes, he says, I know Yediot Achronot, I know why. What do you want to know? And you talk to him. You know, Zelensky is a comedian, television comedian. And he gathered his friends from the television, and this is the regime. Why do I say this? Because the resistance against the Russians in the war was coming from down up, from the citizens up. Zelensky understood that he has to. Zelensky, I know. Do you hear me, or do I have to repeat all the? I'll eat your evening if you do. So Zelensky, actually, Zelensky government, or the government apparatus, was running like a neighborhood grocery. There is something nice about it. It makes journalistic work easier, but it is not a way that you run a country, the second biggest, or I think the second biggest in Europe, with 44 million people, like a grocery, neighborhood grocery. But I must say about Zelensky that when this Jewish guy realized that the war is real, which means it's coming, he all of a sudden, like a good actor, understood the role he has to play. He has to be now Churchill. And it was amazing to see the transformation of this comedian, really comedian, from television figure or president that not all the Ukrainians supported, to national figure, national leader. That means that when you see someone and you say, this is charismatic, he's good leader, and then you see another guy saying, he's not so, wait until the test moment comes. And Zelensky also made very wise decisions. He was clever enough to get advices from the Americans and the British. American and the British are behind the whole thing. And he acted okay. So I meet at Saturday, excuse me for those who Shobrei Shabbat, that I meet, but it was my job. And he gave me the whole plan. I said, where did you get it? The whole plan. You are giving me a plan, they will do that first, then they will do the second thing afterwards. And he said, to be honest with you, we got it all from the CIA, as I'm telling you. And I said, okay. And he understood why, what do I do by okay? Are you allowed to publish it? He says, yes, they want me to publish it. They want the whole world to know what Putin is up to. And the whole world at that time believed that Putin is not going to invade. So he said at the first there will be the false flag, the campaign of lies, propaganda. Then the Duma, the Russian parliament, will make a decision about Donbass, this region of Ukraine. Donbass region, south of Kharkov. Kharkov in Russian, Kharkiv in Ukrainian. And that reminds me that it was a problem because Russian and Ukrainian are very similar languages. Now, the roadblocks and the people who manned the roadblocks, many of them were very drunk. And they see someone traveling in the streets, coming to the roadblock, and they ask you, whom are you with? And you say, I'm a paper, this, Israeli. I show the passport, but they don't believe. They say, where are you going? In the beginning, I thought they are asking, where are you going? Because they wanted to know where I go. No, they wanted to see how I will pronounce the name of the place. If I will say, for instance, if I will say Lugansk, it's okay. Lugansk is one of the two districts in Donbass. If I say Lugansk, it means that I'm with Russian tendency. But if I will say Luhansk, that's a whole different story. That's simple. But we all Jews know the name of the town Chernovitz. Chernovitz is in Russian, it is in West Ukraine, close to Romanian border, where my partner, by the way, was born. But in Ukrainian, they call it Chernavtsi. Don't try it at home, it will break your teeth. It took me a long time but it was crucial when we roam around in Kiev and mainly outside Kiev, where they had no funnies, no jokes. And they were sometimes pulling the trigger at us, which means threatening us. They didn't pull the trigger, but there was an Israeli that in the day the war broke out that started to make jokes with them, and they shot him in the head. Just as simple as that. Okay, we're still at the 18th. I believe that I know the plan of Putin to invade, but at the same time, Putin is saying in public to Macron, remember the meeting with the ends of the huge table between the two, telling Macron, and Macron said, no invasion. I have no intention to invade Ukraine. But the Americans are saying he's going to invade on Wednesday. Comes Wednesday, the Russians are not invading. So the whole world said the Americans don't know what they do. And as a matter of fact, now we know that Putin wanted to invade on that Wednesday, on the 16th, but because the Americans exposed his plan, and that was the first time that the Americans used intelligence for public diplomacy. But she's doing public diplomacy it is a new term in the world today, public diplomacy, that you do not only diplomacy from ear to mouth and from mouth to ear, but you make a public diplomacy. What they did, the Americans and the British did in Ukraine, in the case of Ukraine, was public diplomacy. They said, we have intelligence, we share it with the whole world. Why they did it? Because it made the European stand behind it. And that was very important for the American and the British. Very important. What Putin wanted? Putin has the perception that Russia has to have buffer zone around it. Which means if this is Russia, so between Russia and NATO, there should be a belt of countries that are influenced by Russia, under the influence of Russia, and so the West, if the West wants to invade Russia, NATO wants to invade. The only thing is that NATO never wanted to invade Russia. NATO was created as a defensive alliance. But Putin, in his mind, paints a West and United States that wants to invade, and he has special account to settle with the Ukrainians. Because the Ukrainians all of a sudden say, we want to go to the West. It's been nice to know you, the Russians. We know you very well, and that is why we don't want to be with you. We want to be with the West. And this is for Putin, is a sort of